What's going on YouTube? It's Teej, back again with another video, and today I'm giving you my tier list ranking for all 32 NFL defenses. Excited to bring this video your way. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Hit the like button if you do. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, but most importantly, this is just a catalyst for a conversation. My rankings are not the right rankings. Let me hear yours down below. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? And who's your favorite team? And what tier do you think they belong in and why? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. And you get the point of this video. We broke it up into tiers so you can get an idea of where I think generally these defenses are, and of course I'm going to be ranking them as we go along, so you even get to see who I think the number 1 defense in the league, who's number 7, who's 13, who's 21, all that sort of stuff. So let's waste no time and let's jump right into it. If you missed the offensive version of this video, it came out on the channel earlier this week. I encourage you to go back and check that out. So we start by talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm going to go ahead and put them in the good tier. This is a defense that really its strength comes with depth. Trey Hendrickson's become a really nice player. Don't know if he's a superstar. Chidobe Awuzie has been a really awesome player since signing there. Don't know if I'd call him a superstar. The one superstar maybe was Jesse Bates, but now that he's gone, Dax Hill I think can be a serviceable replacement. Replacing Von Bell might be a little bit trickier, but I also think Jordan Battle might be the guy for that task. Bring back Jermaine Pratt. You got DJ Reader is one of the best defensive tackles. Again, there's nothing that says, wow, that guy changed the complexion of this defense. He's one of the best players in the league at that position. He's top 5, he's top 8, he's top 10, whatever. Maybe Hendrickson, you could work that in the edge category, maybe. But, there's just no glaring weakness. And plus, Lou Anarumo, I do take coordinators into account here for this video, just like I did in the offensive rankings. That plays a huge part of it. I think Lou Anarumo is one of the best defensive coordinators in football, and he takes advantage of this defense that really has no glaring weakness and is super flexible and versatile, and you can do a lot of different things with, and that's reflected in the coverages and schemes that he plays down to down, quarter by quarter, week by week, against various opponents. So yeah, I definitely think they belong in the good tier, and they're actually one of the teams towards the top of the good tier. Next, New England Patriots, they're also going to go in the good tier, put them behind the Cincinnati Bengals. They're kind of the same when it comes to the front seven, where it's like, I don't know if any of these linebackers or edge rushers are really saying like, whoa, this guy's an absolute game wrecker. I like Christian Barmore. Matt Judon's been a really nice sighting. Devon Godshaw, good enough run stopper. Dedrick Wise has been pretty productive. There's guys that fit the New England scheme and they fit it well. And because of that, they have good production. They play pretty well. But again, doing so while not being like, oh my gosh, they have one of the superstars at that position there. That's why this is a great defense. Then you get to the back half, and losing Devin McCourty feels like a loss that's going to loom large, but they have a lot of depth there at safety that I think they can kind of fill in and piece that out. And then, they've gotten some okay play from corners. Jonathan Jones, Jack Jones. I even think Marcus Jones, if he gets the chance to, can be a good slot corner. If not, he's an awesome special teamer. But Christian Gonzalez is what takes them from this average tier to good tier for me, because he was my CB1, not only because I thought he had a pretty relatively high floor. His movement skills, you just don't come around guys that are that type of athlete. So he didn't have the floor of Devin Witherspoon, but I don't think he's that far off. But he definitely has the higher upside. In Bill Belichick defenses, when you give him that shutdown Stephon Gilmore, that Darrelle Revis when he was there, the Ty Law really turning back the clock. When you give that defense that number 1 shutdown guy, it makes everything else just fall perfectly into place. And Gonzalez, I think, has that potential. So I'm excited to see Bill Belichick, Steve Belichick work with him and get the most out of him. And also, that's the other component here. Bill Belichick, Steve Belichick, those are good defensive minds. So they definitely belong in the good tier. And I think the same can be said about the New Orleans Saints, who I'm going to put ahead of the New England Patriots. This is a unit that's almost the opposite of Cincinnati, but I don't really truly mean that. No super, immediate needs as long as their stars are healthy. But, it's like Marshawn Lattimore and then a couple of other guys that play corner that, Alontae Taylor, going into year 2, Paulson Adebo going into year 3, like the safety, especially Tyrann Mathieu still playing good football. Demario Davis is awesome. Pete Warner was solid last year. Defensive line, Cam Jordan, mostly playing good football. Now we get to see what, Peyton Turner's all about. You add Isaiah Foskey. Okay. But the depth behind that, like if Demario Davis goes down, linebackers are going to be a huge issue. If Marshawn Lattimore misses time, corner's going to become a big issue. If Cam Jordan gets hurt and they're leaning on those 2 young guys, this defense is going to feel that. So it's like I look at the names on paper and it's like, yeah, this is a really good defense. Plus Dennis Allen, really good defensive coach. I like that. But it's like, man, they're 1 injury away from a very scary slide down this board. So right now, I'll put them in the good tier. We're, kind of taking risk for injuries for all these teams that I'm not Nostradamus. I can't predict who's going to get hurt and who's going to stay healthy. So I'll put them in the good tier, but this is one of those teams that's 1 injury away, especially to a Jordan or a Davis or, Tyrann Mathieu, Christian Lattimore, away from being a team that is not in this good tier any longer. Anyways, let's move on. Next team is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, they're going to be one of the top teams here in the good tier. I may change my mind and flip who I have just ahead of them at the top of the good tier once we get to the end of the video. We'll see. But I mean, Pittsburgh, I'll start with the weaknesses. It's the cornerback room, right? Like Pat Peterson, Joey Porter Jr., what they do well at this point in their careers are very different. Like, I think Joey Porter can play zone, but the first thing you think of is man press. And Pat Peterson used to be that guy, but now he's the zone specialist. So how's that mix? Are we running a little bit of, cover 3 match where it's a little bit of man for Joey Porter Jr.? Is it cover 6 where maybe one side's playing a little bit more man and Pat Peterson on the other side's maybe playing a little squat zone? Maybe. But Minkah Fitzpatrick's awesome, and I think you can do a lot of different things with him. Devontae KZ actually played pretty well for Pittsburgh. A little bit we got to see him, so excited to see what he does in a full-time role. And then, linebacker is going to be a little bit of a question mark, right? Like Cole Holcomb, I think, is a solid signing, decent enough value, and he's a good coverage player, but I don't know if he's taken that from a weakness to anything that's considered a strength per se. And Layden Roberts is, he's kind of a journeyman for a reason. He's good enough, but not spectacular. But this team gets to the top of the good tier because of that pass rush. Like, there's an area where Pittsburgh's going to win. It's with T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, and now you're adding Keanu Benton to that mix. Alex Highsmith's been a really productive pass rusher. Heck, I think Nick Herbig could play a little bit of off-ball linebacker, also be used as a third pass rusher. Yeah, I think that pass rush is ultimately what takes Pittsburgh towards the top of the good tier. If you take away Cam, Hayward from this defensive line, they're probably shifting towards the middle of the good tier. And if you take a TJ Watt out of the mix, they're probably bottom of the good tier, maybe even average. But they win so much with that pass rush. Ogunjobi's solid enough. Benton, I'm really excited about his addition. And again, Highsmith, plus, they signed Marcus Golden, good third pass rusher there. And the TJ Watt, if he stays healthy, plays all 17, he's going to play 17 games at a level that is Defensive Player of the Year worthy, right? So that's ultimately what puts Pittsburgh where they are, despite some weaknesses and concerns I have in the back end. San Francisco, I'm going to put them in the elite tier. I just look at that front four and I'm like, dude, who is stopping Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, their other interior defensive lineman, former first-rounder Javon Kinlaw, as well as Eric Armstead, who can even do some stuff on the edge. And then you have, like, Clelin Ferrell, showing up, and it's like, well, he's about to have the Charles Omenihu treatment where Omenihu wasn't a top 5 pick or anything, but guy who was seen as not a great player is going to go to San Francisco and turn their career around and maybe get multi-million-dollar contracts handed their way. I could totally see that being Clelin Ferrell. But you also have Drake Jackson, second-year player at a USC, right? Like, that's the defensive line that's going to continue to win, especially with the addition of Hargrave. Man, that interior is going to be insane. And then, best linebacker tandem in the league with Greenlaw and Warner. They have a number 1 guy in Travarius Ward. They have some safeties that have played well for him. Talanoa Hufanga, maybe better at the beginning of last year than the end, but still a good player. Deshaun Gibson played really good football for them down the stretch. I'm interested to see how they replace Jimmy Ward in that nickel role because, you sign Isaiah Oliver, who's been playing slot corner. But I almost wonder if there's a Jair Brown, their day 3 or round 3 selection from Penn State. I almost think he's a better fit for that role with how they use Jimmy Ward. But either way you spin it, if they find that Ward replacement and a somewhat competent player, I think this is going to be one of the best defenses in football. And, spoiler alert, maybe they stay in that number 1 spot. Let me get to Arizona. They're going to be the only team in this awful tier. And I feel bad, man. Like, I don't really mean to just continue to shit on the Cardinals in all these rankings videos, but they're embracing where they are in this rebuild, and that's what I appreciate about Monty Austinforth. He's not looking at a bad roster and saying, we're going to squeeze 7 wins out of that. He's saying, no, we should only win 1 or 2, maybe 3 games this year, and let's pick number 1 overall next year, control the draft. Let's do it. That's what's exciting to me. And, they lose Byron Murphy. They lose Zach Allen. They're going to have to trade Budda Baker. What's left? Isaiah Simmons, David Collins, and 2 first-rounders that I don't really know if they've lived up to that first-round status. Yeah, it's a little rough right now in Arizona. And, I think this team should just embrace being a bad team for a year, maybe even 2. Jonathan Gannon, I think, is a good defensive mind, but there's only so much work he'll be able to do. I think this is going to be one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And, spoiler alert, you're going to be the only team in the awful tier, which I feel bad about. Maybe you can move some of the teams from the bad tier down to awful, but Arizona's kind of beginning of a rebuild, so they have a bad roster. It comes with it. Then we get to Atlanta. This was tricky because you get one of these teams that does a ton in the offseason. It's like, oh my God, you get caught up in the hype and you're like, oh my God, they got to be one of the best defenses. Oh my God, they got to be good. They got to be the great team. I'm not quite there yet. Not quite there with Atlanta because, I like, the addition of Calais Campbell. Older player, injury could be a concern, but he's still solid. He's still a good player. David Onyemata missed some time, but when he's on the field, he's a good player. Grady Jarrett. Still a good football player, but getting up there in age. But I think that's a defensive line that is certainly better than what we've seen in the years past with Atlanta. But we'll kind of come back to that. Linebackers still a little bit of a question. True edge rushers. we'll see what Arnold Ebiketie does in year 2, but that's still not a group that really wows me. AJ Terrell coming off a down year, but I still think of him as one of the best up-and-coming corners in football. We'll see what happens on the other side of, Terrell. That could be a little problematic in my opinion. Richie Grant, the big addition is Jesse Bates, right? Like adding Bates could really change a lot about that defense, especially with Ryan Nielsen coming over as the DC from New Orleans. They played a lot of single high safety looks. Jesse Bates is going to be awesome if they continue to do that in Atlanta. So there's a lot of additions where it's like, man, this defense is really getting better. Okay, here we go. I still got to put them in the average tier because it's an older defensive line and not a lot of great answers at edge. So you're kind of still leaning on Calais Campbell playing like he did 8 years ago and Grady Jarrett playing like he did 3 years ago. And it's like, no guarantee that happens. And on top of that, linebacker still a bit iffy. And that other number 2 corner spot, like I still think that could be an area where they get picked on a little bit. And also like being an average defense for Atlanta would be the best defense we've seen from the Falcons in 5 years, 6 years, 7, maybe 8. Like when was the last time we could say the Falcons had an average defense? This has been a real problem unit for Atlanta. So even just going from bad to average is a huge step in the right direction. So I hope that, my ranking isn't too disappointing for Falcons fans, because really I hope you look at this and you're like, yes, we finally have a defense that can be considered average or better. Because I might be wrong. Maybe they're better. Average or better. When was the last time we could say that about an Atlanta defense? It's been some time. Anyways, long tangent aside, let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens defense. I'm going to also put them in average. Kind of a lot of the same concerns. I'm actually going to go behind Atlanta. Number 2 corner, bit of an issue. I think Trenton Simpson plus Roquan Smith. Okay, that's a solid linebacker tandem. I like the safeties. Marcus Williams plus Kyle Hamilton playing the nickel. Okay, I like all that. Defensive line and edge is where they kind of lose me, because they don't even have the defensive line that Atlanta does, because obviously Calais Campbell's not there anymore. Odafe Owe may be able to take that step forward this year. David Ajabo, didn't get to see a whole lot of him last year. Just feels like a team without a elite pass rusher. That's why when I did the adding one legend to every defense, Terrell Suggs is one of the first names I could put down, because I was like, dude, you give the Ravens a dude who's going to get double-digit sacks year in and year out, that defense gets real scary, and then we'll figure out that number 2 corner spot, because that's the only other area then I'm worried about. I just don't know if this pass rush does anything to really scare offenses, really. Like, I don't know if they have a guy that could take a game over. And then when you're not getting that pass rush, that number 2 corner spot feels that much more of an issue. So I feel like that's kind of where my conundrum is right now with the Ravens. Like a lot of what they have, especially with Roquan Smith, Trenton Simpson, I think it's a really fun linebacker tandem. Marlon Humphrey's still a great player, like the safeties as well. I just think missing an edge is going to be potentially really problematic for Baltimore. We'll see. Maybe they'll make another big, move this offseason to try to solidify that area. Next, Buffalo Bills. They're also going to go in the average tier. I'm actually going to put them right between Atlanta and Baltimore. I think the secondary gets better. I think Kyrie Elam grows in year 2. Christian Benford, same thing. Hopefully Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer are able to stay healthy the full year. That's another component. Those are 2 guys that really have not had a whole lot of injuries throughout their career. And last year was kind of the first real sign of maybe what could come, but maybe it's also a fluke. Who knows? Von Miller is going to have to be the guy that he was the first half of last year, which is a little problematic because leaning on a 34-year-old edge rusher coming off another major leg injury, I don't know if I really want to put my eggs all in that basket. We also saw Greg Rousseau take a step forward last year, so hopefully he can build upon that. But you also need like Boogie Basham take a step forward. You need some of these other edge rushers to really step into their own. Or Ed Oliver, right? Like Ed Oliver looked like he was headed towards a breakout season. Then Von Miller gets hurt, that force multiplying effect is gone, and Ed Oliver is just kind of back to where he was throughout the duration of his rookie contract, which is disappointing, to say the least. Also, they lose Tremaine Edmonds. How are they going to fill that? So, yeah, there's things I like. I think the secondary ultimately will be better, but I could see them taking a step back everywhere else. So I kind of feel like they negate an average feels about right for that Buffalo defense. Do like Sean McDermott, though, as a defensive-minded head coach. All right, then we get to the Carolina Panthers. I'm going to put them in the good tier. Just ahead of New England, but a little bit behind New Orleans. So NFC South, those 2 teams are going to be relatively close to one another once we finish this video, actually side by side. The reason I put them just ahead of New England is because of Brian Burns. Like, they have a dude that guy's a stud. And also, Christian Gonzalez, you're hoping he becomes a player as good as J.C. Horn is now. And he could be better, but you're really hoping that he gets to J.C. Horn level or above. And when I know one team has J.C. Horn and the other one's hoping a guy can get there, it's easier to just go ahead and take the team that has the guy that's already kind of a superstar in the making. So Horn, Burns, and Frankie Luvu too. I mean, what a year he had last season. Those 3 guys all feel like a step above what is in New England currently. Derek Brown too also got a little bit better last year. Now there's definitely spots where I think Carolina has some concerns, like number 2 corner, another edge rusher, all those things that I talked about throughout the course of the offseason. I also really like Ejiro Evero as the DC. So I like a lot of what's there. They're just kind of missing a few of those complementary pieces, like that second corner, that second edge rusher, to where it could take this defense from good to elite or good to the top of the good tier. But, all in all, still a really, really good defense. Then we get to the Chicago Bears. I'm going to put them in the average tier just behind the Baltimore Ravens. It's another one I struggle with because Jaquan Brisker, Eddie Jackson, that's a fun safety tandem. And we've seen the impact that safeties have in that Matt Eberflus defense. They're massive. They're paramount for that scheme. So I'm like, wow, that's pretty special. Defensive line, though, especially that 3-tech position that's also pivotal for Matt Eberflus in his defense. There's some question marks. Now, could Gervon Dexter or Zach Pickens, rookies this year, be guys that step in that role and are awesome right away? They could, but they could also play like rookies, which is to say maybe they aren't that guy right away. So, the defensive line still worries me a little bit. Don't see a whole lot of great edge talent either. I do like what they did at linebacker. Spent a lot on Tremaine Edmonds, but 25-year-old linebacker coming off his best season. I can understand their thinking at least. And then TJ Edwards is actually one of the best value contracts in free agency, point blank and simple, if you ask me. So love that signing. You add Tyreek Stevenson, you add Terrell Smith, that secondary. Like the corner room and where it's headed. So I like where they're headed in the direction, the trajectory this team is on. I just need to see that defensive line kind of figure it out. And once I see that, this defense is going to be well above the average tier. All right, next up is the Cleveland Browns. They, too, are going to go in the good tier. I'm going to put them behind Cincinnati. And, yeah, I'll keep them ahead of New Orleans. And this is a team that's really started to climb up my rankings with what they've done across the defensive line, namely adding Zadarius Smith. That's the best edge rusher they've had opposite of Myles Garrett throughout Myles Garrett's career. So that is awesome. And then behind that, Ogbo Okoronkwo, Alex Smith going to his second year. You draft Isaiah McGuire, who's a really toolsy, freaky, upside type of play at edge. You just need to polish him up a little bit. Siaki Ika next to Dalvin Tomlinson. Okay, that's a 1-2 punch that both can eat up space and stop the run, but also have a little bit of pass rush skills. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Anthony Walker, if he's healthy, can play like he did 2 years ago. That's a linebacker tandem where I'm fine with. A lot of these teams, especially in the good tier, their weak spots at linebacker. But that's actually a team where, like, if Walker plays like he did 2 years ago and Joke's healthy, it's actually a pretty decent linebacker core considering they're going to play nickel. And those 2 guys on the field, I'm fine with that. And then the cornerback room. Dude, Greg Newsome in year 3 is your nickel corner behind Denzel Ward and MJ Emerson, you are drafting right in the secondary. That is an awesome trio. And then in the in the safety room, Juan Thornhill, underrated free agent signing, and you still have Grant Delpit, some unknown potential that might be there. So yeah, like a lot of what is there for Cleveland. Now these moves need to come to fruition, right? Like I get excited about the defensive line moves, and it's kind of like what I said about Atlanta. You can get a little carried away because you're like, oh yeah, it's gonna work, it's gonna be fine, they're gonna be so much better. You can't take that for granted. There's no guarantee that actually happens. Now that being said, if there's a guy that does get that defensive line and all those additions to really come to their full potential impact, Jim Schwartz is a damn good hire as a DC. This guy has gone from one place to another and generated pass rush left, right, center, everywhere he's gone, right? Like all of those defensive line additions, and you bring in Jim Schwartz, I think this defensive line is going to be the best that we've seen during the Myles Garrett career. So as a Steelers fan, I'm terrified, especially with our offensive line. But I think this is going to be maybe the best Browns defense that we've seen in the last half decade or so. So yeah, I think this is going to be one of the best defenses in the NFL. Then we get to Dallas, and I'm going to put them in the elite tier. I mean, outside of linebacker, Leighton Vander Esch, and then either one of the LSU guys, Jabril Cox, Damone Clark, one of those 2 guys is going to play next to LVE, and that's, I guess, an okay tandem. But everywhere else, this defense is really fun. I mean, Stephon Gilmore, Trayvon Diggs. Then you look at the defensive line. They add Mozzie Smith on top of Osa Odighizuwa, who took a nice step forward last year. That's an awesome inside pairing. And then on the edge, Micah Parsons, one of the best edge rushers in football. Tank Lawrence still playing really good football. Sam Williams. They got depth beyond that, too. Dante Fowler, Dan Quinn, one of the best defensive coordinators in football. I mean, this team is loaded everywhere except for linebacker, which I think is the one spot where you can be less than spectacular. And still, Dallas's linebacker tandem is not, terrible. It's not like they're rolling out 2 CFL guys. Those are 2 solid starters, especially in the NFL. So, easily one of the best defenses in the NFL. And I'm actually going to have the Denver Broncos right next to them in the elite tier. This was a team I really struggled with, but the more I thought about it, Vance Joseph may not be Ejiro Evero, but I still like Vance Joseph a lot as a DC. They just do it differently. A lot more man press for Joseph. I think Pat Surtain's ready for that change in scheme, going from zone heavy to playing more man press. He's so technically sound that I don't really worry about him. Darius Mathis, maybe that's an issue on the other side, but, still an intriguing second-year player. Justin Simmons, one of the best safeties in football. You bring back Kareem Jackson. Linebacker room, Alex Singleton, nothing crazy, Josie Jewell, but solid enough guys. And then, maybe where you could tell me this team should be a little bit lower is because, how many games is Randy Gregory playing? Is Baron Browning for real, or did he have just a really hot start to learning how to play edge for those first 4 weeks and then petered out for a reason? Nick Benito, how much do we see him? So the edge gives me a little bit of, pause, but ultimately, I think as long as Gregory's healthy, I think Baron Browning, I think he's a legitimate edge. I think that was more than a flash in the pan. I think that's legitimately who he can be. I think Nick Benito is an awesome third down pass rusher. Linebackers are good enough. Secondary is pretty great, and a good DC. So I put him in the elite tier, but this is the one team that I have up here where I'm like, maybe not. And, we'll kind of talk about that once we get the other two teams that are going to be in the elite tier once we get there. All right, Detroit Lions. They're going to go in the good tier. Now, they're going to be one of the bottom teams in the good tier. But like I said with Atlanta, if you're a Detroit Lions fan, embrace the fact that this team is in the good tier, because this was a team through the first 8 weeks of last year that was historically bad. So going from historically bad to finishing the year just, bad-ish, kind of back half the NFL, to them becoming a good defense. Oh my God, the progress and how quickly you've done it. That's got to be exciting. Jack Campbell, I think, is going to have a ton of production right away. Brian Branch, him plus Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Cam Sutton, who can play inside out at corner. There's a lot of fun to be had there if you're Aaron Glenn, moving these guys around, just creating a ton of confusion. But I think Sutton's going to play on the outside, just like Emmanuel Mosley, 1 year, $6 million contract, buy low, high upside type of signing. So ton of work in the secondary throughout free agency. You add Jack Campbell, and this is a defensive line. Ali McNeil, only another year better. Year 2 of Aiden Hutchinson, year 2 of James Houston. This is a team that's on the up and up on that side of the ball. And if specifically Jack Campbell helps out and shores up that run defense, keeps Malcolm Rodriguez clean, I think it's a defense where you're really going to see its progress that it's made. They raised the floor of the secondary and what you can expect there, and I think Jack Campbell goes a long way cleaning up that run defense. So I have to put him in the good tier. I think they've done a lot of good stuff. I'm also somebody who really likes Aaron Glenn. Maybe I'm a little too high on him. I thought he would make for a really interesting head coaching candidate. Maybe this is the year where Detroit takes enough step forward where he earns that opportunity and gets some interviews next coaching carousel. But maybe that's also why I have him as high as I do. Next, Tennessee Titans. I'm going to put him just ahead of the New England Patriots. Part of it's Mike Vrabel. But also Azeez Al-Shaair. Like, if you're going to lose David Long, that's a really good signing to kind of mitigate that disappointing loss for me. Moving on from Bud Dupree, but he really wasn't worth the money that they gave him. There's no other way to spin it. And then you bring in Arden Key, who I think $7 million a year, dude, that's going to be one of the best value players they have on that side of the ball. Jeffrey Simmons is becoming one of the best interior pass rushers in football, and we're kind of getting to the point. Well, we'll see what Aaron Donald does this year, but we might start getting to the point where we get guys who were better or playing better than Aaron Donald, who kind of surpass him as the best IDL. And Jeffrey Simmons, him and Chris Jones, to me, are like the guys to take the reins there. And there's some intriguing secondary players. Like, I'm a really big Elijah Molden fan. I also think Christian Fulton has been a solid football player. I think Sean Murphy-Bunting ultimately might play on the outside, which might be for the betterment of Roger McCreary then playing the slot. But again, you also have Elijah Molden there. So a little tough. But all in all, I think there's enough pieces plus good coaching to keep this team in the good tier. Middle of the pack good tier, but I think there's enough to work with there, namely a superstar like Jeffrey Simmons. Green Bay Packers, I'm going to put them just behind the Cleveland Browns. It's another team that just has no glaring weakness. I look at their defensive depth chart and I'm like, yeah, there's just no real thing that stands out. And I'm like, that's going to be a problem spot. They're going to struggle against the pass. They're going to struggle against the run because of that. Devontae White in year 2, Quay Walker year 2 solidifies those two areas. But you still have someone like a Kenny Clark. You still have someone like a Devondre Campbell there. So it's not even like those guys are being leaned on to be the best of. They're just really nice complementary number 2 pieces, so to speak, in those respective areas. Jair Alexander might be my cornerback one in the NFL. I don't know. Jalen Ramsey is definitely still up there, so I don't know. It's kind of tough, but I know Ramsey does a little bit more in run defense, so it depends on how you measure that. But Jair Alexander, either way you spin it, one of the best corners in football. Eric Stokes is really solid. Anthony Johnson Jr., I think, could take over for Rasul Douglas as this nickel corner. Maybe, maybe not. And the longer Adrian Amos stays as a free agent, the more likely it feels like he's just going to sign a 1-year deal back in Green Bay, and it's going to be him and Darnell Savage all over again, which is a safety tandem I actually like. I think Joe Barry's done a good job coming over as the DC. So, yeah, I got to put him in the good tier, and they're actually going to be on the upper side of the good tier. Houston, they're going to be the bottom side of the bad tier, but kind of like Arizona, they're in a rebuild. Like, it wasn't going to get fixed overnight. So Derek Stingley Jr. in year 2, like if he takes a step forward, he single-handedly can move him in the average tier because Derek Stingley Jr. freshman year at LSU, that's a CB1. And if he gets closer to that, then my oh my, that secondary looks really good. Steven Nelson's solid. Jalen Petre's a playmaker. If he shores up his tackling, that moves this team in the right direction. Linebacking core is a little weak. Christian Harris, I'm interested to see what D'Amico Ryans does with him. Henry To'oTo'o was not a guy I was super high on in this year's class, so I'm not really factoring him too much in the mix. And I think the defensive line, Jerry Hughes coming off a really productive year. You add Will Anderson, but especially the interior, still some work to be done there. They're going from one of the worst defenses in football to where they're still on the bad side, but they're kind of trending in the right direction. So in another year's time, this feels like a defense that's easy going to move up another tier. And hey, depending on how much magic D'Amico Ryans can work, maybe 2 tiers. All right, next is the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to put them just behind the Green Bay Packers. Really like the linebacking core. EJ Speed was a really nice player. Hopefully Shaq Leonard plays the full season, and we get to see those two play one another or play next to one another, especially considering I think Speed has proven that he can be the guy who replaces Okereke and then some maybe. Love the secondary now, right? Like, I mean, you got Blackman still back there, and those safeties are going to be important, but I mean, what they did with this year's draft class, I mean, Isaiah Rodgers played well enough to earn a starting opportunity outside, but you still then have Julius Brents, Jalen Jones, Darius Rush. Brent's in the 2nd, Jones was in the 7th, I think, and then Rush was in the 5th. Either way, those last 2 guys were on day 3. The value there is impeccable. It is fantastic value they got with those guys. So now it's like, man, they almost got too many outside corners because now I'm kind of thinking about, do they move Isaiah Rodgers to the nickel or something like that? But then again, the thing there is Kenny Moore. I mean, last year was a down year for Moore, but up until that point was one of the best nickel corners in football. So if he gets back on track, there's really no spot to put Rodgers on the inside because Kenny Moore's there. Or maybe they trade him and get 2024 draft capital. Maybe not though. So I think that secondary could be really, really special. I think the linebacking core is really good. DeForest Buckner is a difference maker on the inside. And now you just got to figure out who's going to step on the edge. Is Kwity Paye taking that year 3 leap? Is it Samson Ibukam, who that free agent signing, you really feel his presence? Is it Deo Odengbo becoming a really awesome 3rd pass rusher, maybe even superseding Kwity Paye on the depth chart and getting those pass rushing opportunities? Maybe. But if they figure out one more legitimate difference maker in the pass rush department on top of DeForest Buckner, that's when this team leaves the good tier and potentially flirts with the elite tier, or at least makes themselves potentially the best team in the good team here. But I like a lot of what's there, but I think they're one edge rusher away from really being a special unit. All right, next up is the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'm going to put them just behind the Buffalo Bills. You know, Josh Allen's a really nice player, and Tyson Campbell's emerging as one of the best up-and-coming young corners in football. And I'm optimistic about Devin Lloyd, but I'm a little concerned about linebacker because Lloyd starts hot, ultimately gets benched for Chad Muma, who still, even he didn't look all that great. Also got a ton of money tied up in Foyesei Oluokun, former Atlanta Falcons. So a lot of assets there, and I don't know if that's a great unit right now. And then even on the interior defensive line, like Devon Hamilton's coming off a solid year. Roy Robertson Harris, is a good player. And then Folo Fatukasi felt like a signing that would come with more impact, but not just yet. Maybe those guys get even better next year. But I could also see a world where they take a step back. There's no real difference maker superstar there, but IDL's kind of light on those guys for the most part in the NFL. And then opposite of Josh Allen, it's like Trayvon Walker. What is he in year 2? And he is kind of an enigma as this number 1 pick that's based solely on upside, not really on college production. So he's a true wait and see. Maybe he's a stud this year and this defense needs to be moved up. If that's the case, if Walker has that year 2 breakout, they definitely should be moved up. But if he's kind of same as last year, I think average is about right for this Jags defense. Next, Kansas City. Actually looking at my rankings, I'm going to put Jacksonville here. And Kansas City is going to go in between their other, heavy hitters in the AFC, so to speak, with Buffalo and Baltimore. But yeah, now I think I got this to where I had set up beforehand. But yeah, Kansas City, they don't need to win games with their defense, right? Chris Jones is the reason I kind of give them the nudge over Chicago and Baltimore because that's a difference maker. That's a potential, that's a stud. George Karlaftis, plus you add a player in free agency like a Charles Omenihu, and then you also add Felix Anudike-Uzomah. Okay, that's a really nice edge tandem and rotation to work through. Like the linebackers, nothing special, but Nick Bolton, Willie Gay Jr., good enough players. In the cornerback room are all very Spagnuolo-esque. Like Justin Watson is totally like a Spagnuolo-esque corner. Trent McDuffie, is this Tyrann Mathieu replacement's intriguing. How they replace Juan Thornhill is going to be fascinating, but Brian Cook actually think is a solid player to replace that production. So yeah, it's like a solid defense. Not a lot of glaring holes, solid players at their weak spots. It's like okay, competent enough, good scheme fits. And then where they're great is Chris Jones, and then like a deep edge rotation. And then if Trent McDuffie takes a step forward in year 2, that could be special. Like they have some areas where they really shine through, namely Chris Jones. So they're going to be towards the top end of the average tier. And then this was potentially the hardest team for me to rank. The Los Angeles Rams, I'm going to put them at the very bottom of the average tier. Now, I can hear you through your screen, but Aaron Donald. No, I hear you. Look at our lads and take away Aaron Donald. You take away Aaron Donald from that defense, I'm sorry, that's the worst defense in football. And I'm not even sure it's close between them and Arizona, to be honest with you. Because at least then they have, Jonathan Gannon. I like Raheem Morris as a DC, but, at least Arizona's got a couple of the young players I could look at, and Simmons and Collins, former first rounders. You take away Donald from that Rams defense, and it is rough. Linebacker, maybe Byron Young steps up and is super productive right away. Got him in the 3rd round. You're kind of expecting him to step into a sizable role. Corner, safety, question marks there. Again, Raheem Morris, good DC, but it's Aaron Donald and no one else really. And I wish I could put it any other way, but that's really the only way to describe this defense. So they're in the average tier for number 99 by himself, literally. Otherwise, this team's in the awful tier. So, yeah, they're going to need some guys to step up this year. Chargers are going to go just ahead of them. They need some of those guys on the interior to step up. Sebastian Joseph-Day, Austin Johnson. They have got to become a team that stops the run better, specifically at the IDL spot. They also need Mack and Bosa to stay healthy, but they also draft Tuli Tuipulotu for that 3rd pass rushing measure, and also just to have all 3 of those guys on the field. I think that would be awesome. So, health question marks at edge. Need some guys on the interior to step up, like Kendricks, like Diane Henley. I think those are 2 coverage linebackers that actually really fit Brandon Staley's defense well. Brandon Staley himself is a good, feather in the cap for this defense. But the secondary outside of Derwin James is, they got a new other safety with Gilman stepping in, replacing their previous starter and Mr. Adderley. And then, J.C. Jackson. Is this New England J.C. Jackson? Or is it what we saw before the injury last year? Because I hope post-injury J.C. Jackson a whole lot better than pre-injury J.C. Jackson was. And then, hit and miss Asante Samuel Jr. Michael Davis is fine. Yeah, I just think that secondary is actually a little underwhelming for what you would expect out of a Brandon Staley secondary, and kind of what the expectations were set at. But a lot of that's J.C. Jackson. If he has a bounce back year, this team's definitely going to be ranked higher. If he is more of the same of last year, and then injuries continue to be an issue in the pass rush department, average might be putting it kindly. Honestly, I can see where this defense really struggles again if, they kind of follow the same path that we saw last year. Miami Dolphins. This is going to be the one that I think I get a lot of pushback on. I'm putting the elites here. Part of it's Vic Fangio. I think Vic Fangio, one of the best defensive coordinators in football. You add Jalen Ramsey, so it might be the best cornerback tandem in football. Ramsey plus Xavier Howard plus Kader Kuho moving into the slot. I'm all about that. Javon Holland's one of my favorite players in the league, so maybe I'm a little biased there, but do it all safety. Sign me up for that. Yes, please. And they get David Long Jr. on pennies on the dollar to pair up with Jerome Baker. Is that not one of the most athletic linebacker tandems in football? Like right up there with Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw? I would argue that the ground those guys can cover is right up there with those San Francisco tandem. So love that. Christian Wilkins, one of the most underrated players in football. He is, people loved, in Chris Jones, Jeffrey Simmons, like I was saying earlier, have the chance to replace Aaron Donald as the best interior defensive lineman currently in the NFL. But Christian Wilkins, especially down the stretch last year, was fantastic. And nobody talks about him in that same conversation, myself included. And Christian Wilkins is a stud. So maybe I should be including him more into that mix. But also Jalen Phillips, a guy who really took a huge step forward down the stretch last year. And I think he picks up on that in year 3. Him, Emmanuel Ogbah on the edge, I think that's a tandem that can be good enough to make this a legitimate elite defense. So they're going to be at the bottom end of this elite tier, as I'm going to go ahead and move this down just so y'all can see the screen just a smidge better. But nonetheless, that's still the elite tier, and that's still a great place to be. So yeah, I'm really excited to see this Miami defense this upcoming season. All right, next up, let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings. They're going to be the top of the bad tier, and similar to what I talked about in the New England offense and the offensive tier ranking, no coordinator hire made a bigger defense on the defensive side of the ball than going from Ed Donatell to Brian Flores. You're going from one of the best, or one of the worst defensive coordinators in football to perhaps one of the best, and a guy who was a 10-plus win a year head coach through the 2 seasons he was in Miami. That's a special hire. So I think that's, transformative. Also, Lewis Cine, Andrew Booth Jr., they barely played. You barely got anything out of them last year, so it's hard to imagine in year 2 they're any worse or any less productive for you. Plus, you bring in Byron Murphy. You sign Marcus Davenport to replace Zadarius Smith, okay. But they're really weak at linebacker and really slow at linebacker, unless we see Brian Asamoah take a huge step forward. But we really didn't get to see him last year, so he's a bit of an unknown, a TBD. And then the interior defensive line's a little weak. I think Jaquelin Roy is going to be asked to step into a sizable starting role. If he's up for the task and can be a solid rookie right away, okay, cool. This defense is a little bit better, and maybe they belong in the average tier. But I just think that interior defensive line, linebacker, and even still corner, there's enough question marks to keep them in the bad tier here. Though I will say the Brian Flores hire almost by itself had me catapult Minnesota up above the 2 LA teams, but there is just not an Aaron Donald in that Minnesota defense. And there's no Bosa, there's no Matt combo, plus Tuli Tuipulotu, and even the linebackers, right? Like Garrett Kendricks, Diane Henley. I'll take those guys with Brandon Staley in that covered scheme versus Brian Asamoah, Jordan Hicks, and Brian Flores' defense, where that feels like that's going to be a weakness that you kind of see pretty much right away. Anyways, let's move on now to the New York Giants. They're going to be the top of the average tier. Another team I really struggled with because that interior defensive line is awesome. Dexter Lawrence, Sexy Dexy, on top of that, Leonard Williams. There's just so much to love about that interior defensive line group. Kayvon Thibodeau in year 2, I think he only gets that much better, picks up where he left off his rookie year. Azeez Ojulari is a good player when he's healthy, but he's often injured. But when he's playing, he's good. Bobby Okereke, I think, is a good signing. Still think they can add one more linebacker, maybe a blitzing type for Wink Martindale, but Okereke is a good add. Still think the safeties are pretty good. I really like Xavier McKinney as a player. And by getting to Deonte Banks, that was my favorite pick of any first-round selection. Banks plus Adoree Jackson. Wink Martindale, for the first time in New York, has 2 corners that he legitimately can work with in his scheme on the outside. So love that addition as well. Yeah, do I think they can get better? True at edge and one more linebacker. And, maybe there is a question mark moving on from Julian Love there. But if Deonte Banks hits the first rounder, that's an awesome corner tandem, and I love that interior defensive line. So top of average, could teeter on the line of being somewhere in the good tier as well. You could sell me on that argument, but do like a lot of what's there, including Wink Martindale himself as the DC. New York Jets. I'm going to put the Jets as the number 3 defense in the NFL. Now, I know they're coming off a really special year. A lot of credit has to go to Robert Saleh. Best corner tandem in football, in my opinion, from last year with Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. I think those guys only get better with another year of chemistry and playing together, second year in the system as well. Add Chuck Clark, him, Whitehead. I think that's a good safety tandem. Still got CJ Mosley. You re-sign Quincy Williams. Okay, linebacker, maybe that's the weak spot, but still don't think it's a massive hole. And then the defensive line, yeah, I'm all about what they got working there. Quinn Williams really took a huge step forward last year, became the superstar player that we thought he could be when he was a top 3 pick. John Franklin Myers, think can play some inside out. You got Carl Lawson coming back off injury. You got Jermaine Johnson year 2 in that defense. And you add Will McDonald as well. That's a deep edge rotation. It's starting to look a lot like what Saleh was working with in San Francisco, which I think is something that he's happy about. So awesome secondary, good enough linebackers, really good defensive line with depth on it. Yeah, got to put him in the elite tier. And I'll put him just ahead of Denver because I think I like Saleh's scheme a little bit more. And I think I like the strength of the Jets defense a little bit more than I like the Broncos' strengths of their defense. Raiders, they're going to get into the bad tier right between Houston and Minnesota. This is kind of like the Rams where it's like, take away Max Crosby from this defense and close your eyes because there is nothing to look at that really excites you. Now, that's being hyperbolic a little bit because Trevon Merrick's still a good player. Nate Hobbs is someone I like. There's some hope for that linebacking core to figure it out. You add Byron Young, should get, the D tackle from Alabama in this year's class. He should shore up the run game a little bit. Yeah, Chandler Jones, not impossible. He figures it out and gets back on track. But it feels like it's Max Crosby, a couple of okay secondary players that are young, and that's it. And I like Patrick Graham as a DC, which really sucks, but I just don't know if he has a whole lot to work with. So yeah, the Raiders got to go in the bad tier. Seattle, I'm going to put just behind Detroit. I'm going to go just behind Detroit. Now, I have to say, my 2 most passionate fan bases I get in my comment section, which I love you guys. Keep at this, and let me hear this argument down below. What defense is better, Detroit or Seattle? I have Detroit up ahead of Seattle I just think there's less glaring weaknesses. I feel a little bit better about banking on their floor, right? They spend all that money in the secondary during free agency. They add another linebacker. And now it's like, maybe they don't have anything that's absolutely special other than maybe Aiden Hutchinson. I can see where that becomes the case in year 2. But they have no glaring weakness, and they have solid secondary. Add Campbell with Rodriguez, like that linebacking core, and enough defensive line talent, namely Aiden Hutchinson, to generate a good pass rush. For Seattle, it's like you bring on Draymond Jones, you bring back Jaron Reed, and their edge group isn't really special, but Uchenna Nwosu actually it was really productive for them last year. So that can be a defensive line that gets enough. Got a really deep linebacker room, actually, with Bobby Wagner coming back. Jordan Brooks, who's still a good player. Devin Bush, I think this is a good spot for him to go and learn from those other 2 guys. A little bit of reclamation project. And the secondary then, I'm really getting excited to see the Seattle secondary week 1 of this upcoming season. Tariq Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, Kobe Bryant playing the nickel. And then the safeties are Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, and Julian Love. Oh my God, there's headline talent there and there's depth. I am in love with that secondary. And I think also the change in DC ultimately has kind of worked out in their favor. So you could sell me on an argument, but you're leaning on aging Bobby Wagner. I don't know about the run defense, specifically in the middle of that defensive line. And I like Uchenna Nwosu generally as a player, but they don't have a stud edge rusher like I think Aiden Hutchinson could be. So that's kind of why I give the Lions the edge. I think they got a little bit more pizzazz maybe, and a few less holes that I'm really worried about. And also maybe it's also the Aaron Glenn factor. Maybe I like him a little bit more as the DC versus Clint Hurdle in Seattle. So, but I think it's close. And again, these two teams being in the good tier is a huge step forward for where we've seen them be over the last handful of seasons, and including points of last year. All right, next up, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I may surprise some people. I think they're the highest NFC South team I have here. They're ahead of the Saints. They're ahead of the Panthers. And yeah, memory serves that. And then also Atlanta. Yeah, so I actually have them as the best defense in the NFC South. Love the cornerbacks. You bring back Jamel Dean, him, Carlton Davis, Antoine Winfield Jr. is this nickel corner safety hybrid. Also Ryan Neal, who's coming off a really good year. That's a cheap contract to dish out for a player who I think could be a really good ad for them. Still like the linebackers. Levante David's a good player. Devin White's a little hit or miss, but when he hits, man, he makes some crazy big plays. And then at defensive line, Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, Logan Hall, Greg Gaines. I mean, they got guys who can be pass down specialists, guys who can be there for run stopping situations. They got a lot of depth, a lot of flexibility with those guys. Just need Vita Vea to get back to where he was in that Super Bowl run, maybe even 2 years ago, where he was the best nose tackle in football. And then at edge, I worry about Shaq Barrett. I am not sure he's going to be the same player that he was even last year pre-injury, but certainly not the same guy he was in that Super Bowl run just because of his age and coming off an Achilles injury. That's just a tough pill to swallow. But to negate that, I think Joe Tryon-Sheik has a breakout year in year 3. I think he could flirt with double-digit sacks this year. Actually, I think he surpasses double-digit sacks. Not by much, but the 10 to 12 sack range I think is in the cards for Joe Tryon-Sheik. So where I think they're losing with one, I think they're gaining with another at edge. And ultimately, I do think this is one of the best defenses in the NFC. I think it's the best defense in the NFC South. And, Todd Bowles may not be a great head coach when it comes to managing clock. And, maybe got a little out of control with their offense last year, needed to reel in Byron Leftwich. But say what you will, the guy's a great defensive head coach. And I think that plays into this ranking as well. Eagles, I'm going to keep them at the top good tier. It's them and Pittsburgh. I kind of deliberate on it. Pittsburgh might have a little bit more special, like a TJ Watt at the pass rush spot. But Philadelphia just has so much depth across the D-line where it's like, I don't need Brandon Graham to be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I don't need Fletcher Cox to be that guy anymore. I got Jordan Davis playing 500 snaps a year. We got Jalen Carter playing 450 snaps a year. Fletcher Cox playing in the passing situations. We got Josh Sweat, Derek Barnett, Brandon Graham. We got all these guys rotating it. Also Nolan Smith, who honestly might just play some off-ball linebacker. And this is another defense where it's like linebacker concerns me. If they play Nolan Smith at off-ball linebacker next to Nakobe Dean, I'm actually really intrigued to see what that looks like. They can still blitz him and take advantage of what he can be as a pass rusher. But you also add another crazy athletic Georgia player right to the middle of that defense, and I actually think Nakobe Dean could become a really nice player for them in year 2. And then it's the secondary, right? Like Reed Blankenship was really good, small sample size, but was really good last year. And then Terrell Edmonds, I'm not crazy about him, but Sidney Brown was actually someone I liked a lot out of the safety class, which wasn't a great safety class this year. But Sidney Brown, best athlete of the bunch. I think he's a good fit there. And then you get back James Bradbury, you bring back Darius Slay, still Avonte Maddox. This is still a really good secondary, and change at DC, maybe that affects a little bit. Maybe that's enough to nudge Pittsburgh ahead of them. But yeah, I just think this is a really balanced and deep defense, especially if they end up playing a little bit of Nolan Smith at off-ball linebacker, just to get him on the field, but also to address an area where I think that is their weakest link on that side of the ball. Last defense to talk about, it's the Washington Commanders, and I'm going to put them just behind Cincinnati. And the reason why is that pass rush, man. That pass rush, when it is on, it is on. And especially, hopefully, Chase Young gets to play all games this year, right? Like, get to see a full season of what Chase Young is all about. Montez Sweat is one of the most underrated players in football, in my opinion. They re-signed Daron Payne, Tim, Jonathan Allen. Those two guys are awesome there in the middle. Lose Cole Holcomb, which could hurt at linebacker, but ultimately it's going to take Jamin Davis taking a step forward anyways. I don't know if Cole Holcomb was going to be enough to change the needle without Davis breaking out anyway. And then the secondary is a little concerning. Like the safeties, Derek Forrest, Cam Curl, I think it's actually a little bit of an underrated duo. Fuller's still playing good football. They need Benjamin St-Juste and Emmanuel Forbes to be good players. St-Juste to take a step forward and Forbes to kind of hit the ground running. He is a good scheme fit. It was one of the first-round picks I wasn't very high on. It was probably one of my least favorite, maybe my least favorite first-round pick. But nevertheless, I can see why they thought he was a good fit for that defense. I just don't know how you look at him and say he's a better player than Christian Gonzalez when Gonzalez is still on the board. But anyways, go back to my draft rankings if you want to hear my thoughts on that. But that pass rush alone could have them in this good tier. And I think there's enough pieces across the board to where this team takes another step forward. Also, Ron Rivera, defensive-minded head coach, Jack Del Rio, who I was calling for him to get fired first half last year, but did a great job getting that defense back on track latter half of the season. So a ton of credit has to go to Del Rio, despite how much I may have some issues with Del Rio, but that's for another video. Nevertheless, that is going to do it for my rankings for all 32 NFL defenses. Got them in tier rankings, got them in order too. So I think San Francisco has the best defense in the NFL, and I think Arizona has the worst. And then you see how it plays out there in between. Let me hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Who's too high? Who's too low? Who's your favorite team? And where should they rank? Both number-wise, but also what tier do you think they belong in? I'd love to hear your thoughts and why they belong where you think they do. But let me hear those thoughts down below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Want to see more football content like this. That is going to do it for me today, though. Until next time, my name is Teach, and I'm signing off.